What's up, YouTube? This is Too Raw for TV, and in this video, I want to talk about one of the greatest NBA players I've ever watched, who unfortunately had a series of injuries which derailed his career, which would have been a Hall of Fame career had it not been for all the injuries. And I'm talking about Anfernee Penny Hardaway. All right, Anfernee Penny Hardaway played college ball with Memphis State University, now known as University of Memphis. I suspect the name change had something to do with its past, civil rights movement and segregation and all that. But he came out of college from now University of Memphis, and many of us first saw him in the movie Blue Chips. And it was during the filming of that movie that co-stars Anfernee Hardaway and Shaquille O'Neal noticed that they had a lot of chemistry with one another. And during the draft, the Orlando Magic had originally shown interest and planned on trying to draft for Chris Webber. But it was Shaquille O'Neal who went to the organization and said, this guy, Penny Hardaway, man, this guy's the truth. You know what I'm saying? You guys should try to get him. So I think he worked out with the Orlando Magic, and they agreed with Shaq's sentiments. And during the draft, they traded picks with Golden State, because Golden State was going to pick Penny Hardaway, which they did. But ultimately, the two teams traded picks, and the rest was history. During Penny Hardaway's rookie year, 93-94 season, he came in as a shooting guard. But he quickly learned the point guard position from established point guard Scott Skiles, whose career was winding down. And eventually Penny Hardaway took over point guard duties. But it was a 94-95 season where Penny Hardaway truly emerged as a star. There was always comparisons with him and Magic Johnson, which I could see in a lot of ways. He wasn't quite built like Magic. Magic was always a little bit bulkier. Even when Magic came in at 6'9", 215, he just had that type of frame where you could see he could put on a lot of muscle mass. He was kind of bulky. Penny was more skinny, more lanky built, 6'7". I think he came to the NBA like 190 or something like that. Eventually, Penny kind of filled out to about 210, but he was real skinny when he came in. He was real athletic, explosive, and but Penny wasn't a selfish player. He wasn't a guy that demanded to shoot the ball 20, 25 times a game. He wasn't like that. Although he could score. He was just in my opinion, one of the most complete basketball players I've ever seen. He was not a great outside shooter. He always was sort of like in the low 30 percentile when it came to three-pointers. But from 22 feet in, he was a really good shooter. He had a good mid-range jump shot. And what separates him from today's point guards, number one, is his size. He was 6'7", and he often used his height to his advantage, as should be. But he was a very good post-up guard. You don't really see that a lot anymore in the NBA. And he would post guys up. He could score in the post. He was explosive. He could dunk. He could score in the paint. Defensively, he was very good. Oftentimes his height just made him a matchup nightmare for other point guards. When I'm thinking about it, I remember when Penny Hardaway was with the Phoenix Suns, and this is when Penny was starting to slide a little bit. But I remember there was a game where he was going up against Allen Iverson, and at this time with Phoenix, Penny Hardaway had moved to the two position. He was a shooting guard because at the beginning, Jason Kidd was the point guard there. Later on, it would be Stephen Marbury. But I think Allen Iverson like went off for like damn near 30 points in the half or something like that, right? I want to say he had like 26 points at halftime in this particular game. And they switched, I'll never forget it, they switched Penny Hardaway to cover Allen Iverson the second half. Iverson went scoreless in the second half of that game. Did not score. And that's the type of defensive player that he was in his prime. But the first few years of his career, like the first 4 years, let's say, or so, I mean, Anfernee Hardaway was a beast, man. Like I said, that 95 year, they won 57 ball games. I think they went like 39-2 at the Arena. And I remember they were just a different team at home. And they just ran through people in the playoffs. I remember it was a playoff game in the first round against the Boston Celtics, but they beat them by like 46 points or something like that. And in the Eastern Conference Finals, excuse me. Before I get to that, I remember they played against the Chicago Bulls, my team, man. And oh my God, this is when my wrath toward them was tremendous. When they beat my Bulls teams 4-2 in the semis, man, and I absolutely hated that team after that. What really pissed me off was they hoisted up Horace Grant, who I saw as a fucking traitor at the time. And I said, ooh, you motherfuckers, you'll get yours. How dare you hoist this traitor up? You know, that was my mindset. But they played the Indiana Pacers in the Eastern Conference Finals. And the Pacers had they put up a valiant effort, man, but they lost in 7. And then the finals, we all know what happened, man. You know, Orlando was probably favored to win that series, even though Houston was the defending champions. But people just still saw them in that prism as the 6th seed. And Nick Anderson missed 4 free throws. And they lost game 1. I think that devastated the Magic because they were still a young team, man. You know, Penny Hardaway was only, 24 maybe? So Shaq was 23. They were a young team. Next year, 96, they win 60 games. And they would have been a bigger story had the Bulls not been doing what they were doing, also in the Eastern Conference. And they were running through the league, man. But one thing that hurt Orlando that I do remember is that they kind of had a subpar road record. Like, I want to say they were like 37-4 at home and maybe like 23-18 on the road or something like that. You know, like they didn't take care of business on the road like they should. And of course, during the playoffs, they ran through everybody, man. But they ran through that buzzsaw, which was the Chicago Bulls, and they got swept. And then ultimately, the Magic organization just blew it with Shaquille O'Neal, and Shaq left, and then that became Penny Hardaway's team. They totally changed the way they played. They became like a run and gun team. Surprisingly, they still won 45 games. That was mostly just because of Penny Hardaway. And what I remember most about Penny in the Shaqless era is that series they had against the Miami Heat. They were down 2-0. And remember, this is that 61-win Miami Heat team, man. They were a very, very, very good defensive team. That most individual scorers were not putting up big points against that team. The only guy I can really think of that really even had some good games against them offensively was probably Jordan. I'm pretty sure there's other guys that had some good games, but consistently. So Penny Hardaway put that team on his back, and he scored like 42 points in Game 3, 41 points in Game 4, and they forced a Game 5. In Game 5, he scored 33 points. They lost, but Penny Hardaway established himself as one of the premier players in the NBA. He was a superstar, man. He averaged 31 points per game in the playoffs during those 5 games, and he was leading the playoffs in scoring average all the way until the last game of the playoffs when Jordan like scored 39 points. That put him marginally over him, like 31.1 points per game. I still to this day suspect Jordan, through his pride, shot Jack that last game to pass Hardaway. But it was after the man that Penny Hardaway that the injury started, man. He had the ACL injury, which robbed him of a lot of his explosiveness. He came back too quickly from these injuries. He kept having to have all these darn knee surgeries, and he kept limiting how much time he would be on the court. He was still solid offensively, but slowly with each injury and each surgery, he was being robbed more and more of his explosiveness to the point where he had to kind of, Phoenix, he was still kind of Penny Hardaway, but afterward, by the time they got Marbury, when he went to New York, he was not the same guy anymore, man. And the only reason why he was still able to be in the NBA as long as he was playing with playing with New York, then going to Orlando, I think one more stint, and then going to in his career at Miami. The only reason why he was able to play for so long is because he had all of the basics down. He was a good jump shooter. His size still made him an effective defender, though he wasn't as good defensively as he got older. And he had a nice jump shot, mid-range. And he improved as a three-point shooter a little bit. He became more like a 35, 37% three-point shooter. So all these things made him still an effective player, man, but he wasn't the same guy. And it was sad seeing him in the last years of his career because you knew this guy should be in the conversation as one of the great point guards of all time. Like, I think he had the potential to be like a top 5 at least all-time point guard, and even that might be selling him short, man. If you give him championship runs, he could have been up there, man. I remember in '96, man, he and John Stockton were the only guards in the NBA to shoot 50% or better from the field. In '96, he was also the only guard to average over 20 points per game, 5 assists a game, and shoot 50% from the floor. So Penny Hardaway was a special player, man. It's just sad that injuries derailed his career, man. He'll never be a Hall of Famer because he just doesn't have the numbers, doesn't have the accomplishments. But we all know, all of us who grew up in that era know that in his prime, Penny Hardaway was the truth, man. He was the real deal.